The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Welcome to Connecting the Dots. Good morning. This is Dan Happel. We are on Tuesday morning, April 9th, and we have a fantastic program ahead of us. We have a program with Michael Shaw and Rosa Corey, and we're going to be talking about the killing of America. It's been happening through all the programs that are part of Agenda 21. We've talked about this subject many times before, but we've got two of the very, very best experts in the entire world on UN Agenda 21 who are going to be talking to our listeners today and telling them about the programs, the regionalism, the different groups, COGs, the councils of government, and all the unelected bodies that are now controlling so much of the really the infrastructure and the property in the United States. And we are losing our country. This is the death of America. Before I get into this, I've got a friend from San Diego, Alan Myers, who's been on our radio program before. He's a forensic accountant, and he sent me a wonderful couple of pieces of information. I'm gonna lay these out, and then we'll get into the rest of the program. But we hear about this great Pacific garbage patch that's about the size of Texas. It's out floating in the Pacific Ocean, and the United States and plastic bottles and six-pack plastic liners that hold plastic bottles are supposed to be the cause of this gigantic garbage patch in the United States naturally. We are the ones that are causing this problem. I mean, we've heard that time and time again. Well, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, as it turns out, microplastics only make up about 8% of that. Most of it is thrown away fishing gear from other countries. It turns out that the top 5 polluters in the world on that are not the United States. They're China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka. And the United States is a very small part of this giant garbage patch. Most of it is thrown away fishing gear, and they say 20% of it is a result of the tsunami that they had in Japan a few years back that caused Fukushima. Anyway, I thought that was a pretty interesting thing, but then I got another deal here that said it lists the 500 biggest polluters as far as air quality in the world. And this comes out of the World Health Association, or World Health Organization. And it's their direct report. Well, guess what? Of the 500 polluting cities, most polluting cities in the world, there's not one in the United States. Of those 500 most polluting cities, about are in China, and they're in India, and they're in Iran, and they are in Poland, and they're in all these countries that are either socialistic or controlled by some despot, and they're controlled economies. And the fact is, the United States isn't one of the top 500 polluting cities in the world. They're not listed anywhere. So I am sick and tired of hearing about how the United States is the cause of all this pollution and all these problems, and we're ruining sustainability worldwide. And we are the ones who need to be bled dry. We need to redistribute our wealth to the rest of the world because we've caused all this pollution, and we are the dirty ones. And all I can say is anybody that believes that and doesn't understand that this is not about a clean environment, it is about controlling people and moving us into a one-world communist government. And you'll note that the biggest polluters are the communist countries, yet they're the darling of the UN. So with that, Michael, welcome to the program, and Rosa, welcome to the program. Michael, would you give our listeners a little bit of information about you, and then we'll talk about your lawsuit, and then I want to also give some time to Rosa because she is a fantastic guest, and I really look forward to this whole conversation.
Well, Dan, I'm glad to be here. It's a great opportunity. I mean, Americans believe, and I believe, that we're in better shape with Donald Trump than we've been in a long time. And yet Donald Trump himself is an advocate for Agenda 21 protestations. He is a supporter of globalism, not perhaps in the same tradition that his predecessors were, who were all true globalists. He seems to be more of the George Orwellian type. He's establishing some continental unions that look more like what Orwell wrote in 1984 than the global world envisioned by Orson Welles in an earlier writing. And so I think we're still in a very dangerous position. Trump intends in the second term to have an infrastructure program that is right out of the Agenda 21 playbook. My background, I became involved in Agenda 21 in the year 2000. I'm from the city and county of Santa Cruz, and that was one of the nation's leaders in promoting this globalist program that centralizes all authority and power and abolishes private property over a course of time. And so I got to see the inner workings from some of the advocates, Cambridge University graduates, etc., working in this little town, and who have succeeded in making property ownership in Santa Cruz County. Now we see it throughout the state of California, being very precarious. And I say that because you can't use your property unless you're part of the government control system that seeks to control all things. And jumping forward to the current time, Agenda 21 is most easily pointed to this program exercised by councils of government, which exist in your town. They exist everywhere across America. And the purpose of the Council of Government is to take control of all land use and development activities. And there's no place like California when it comes to addressing that whole dynamic. And in fact, the San Francisco COG, called ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, is leading the nation in terms of reestablishing the nature of local government. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how your local government is on the verge of being transformed as the Bay Area has been. And we want to make the listeners aware of how that happens so that they can watch it happen and stop it from happening in their own locale. And that's been the focus we've had for a good while. Rosa and I have had a lawsuit against Dave Bagnell filed in 2014, and we're going to bring people up to date on where that stands.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael. And I have to say that I've known you for quite a long time now, and you are really the tip of the spear when it comes to fighting back against UN Agenda 21, and California is the tip of the spear when it comes to implementing Agenda 21, and I'm really, really thrilled to have you here as a guest. Rosa, I want to bring you into the discussion. Would you please tell our listeners a little bit about your background? I read your book, Behind the Green Mask. Well, I don't know, right after it came out. I'm thinking it was probably 6 years ago, something like that. But you have been really actively involved in trying to expose as well as Michael, and I want you to give our listeners a little bit of your background.
Well, great, and I'm so glad to be with you and with your listeners. I think it's very important that we talk about this, that we continue to bring it out of the shadows, because this is really the reality, is that so many of us who talk about United Nations Agenda 21 sustainable development are marginalized purposely by the press and by, basically all the government agencies and government minions who are pushing it for so many different reasons, and I'll be very happy to talk about that and talk about the councils of government. I want to just mention that to comment on your opener, Dan, about ocean trash, there's no penalty for lying. And, the Jussie Smollett thing, I think if your listeners are familiar with this, the hoax of Jussie Smollett, the actor who said he was jumped and beaten up for being gay and mixed race, and then it turned out that he faked that. In fact, this is symptomatic of what's happened in our culture, in our society, and I want to be clear that United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development is not just a land use plan, it's an entirely whole life plan. So it includes every aspect of your life, and that includes culture and education, of course. So the watchword is that the end justifies the means. And, of course, no one's going to remember, Dan, that the United States is not responsible for that trash island out there in the Pacific, because the story is already out there. And the story is such a wonderful story and has occupied such a sort of almost a cultural folk story now, that even if you present the truth to people, they will still continue to cling to that artificial story, the lie, the fake. So this is what's very clear with Agenda 21, that you can, as long as you get it out there, as long as it's gotten out there by the powers that be, it grabs the social construct, and then it's very difficult to break through that, especially for those of us who are referred to as conspiracy theorists. And this is not a theory, it's a fact, United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development. So a little quick thing about me. I'm a retired district branch chief for the California Department of Transportation. I was a expert witness, a litigation support person in land use and land valuation. I'm a commercial industrial appraiser, and appraising large property for freeway projects. And about 2002, I saw a planning revolution happening in the San Francisco Bay Area, where it was not clear what you could do with property any longer. That you had basically, you couldn't do much development by right, in spite of your zoning. so I was watching that happening, and it was making my job difficult, and it was a real concern. And at that same time, I started to decide that I wanted to do some community service. And I was elected to and this was, Bush era. I was reading Dude, Where's My Country? I'm a liberal Democrat. And I got elected to do community service on a citizens oversight panel for a huge redevelopment project going right through the center of a fairly large city. And it was a mystery project. Nobody knew what was going to happen with this project, even though we were the oversight committee. And as a person who worked for government and was familiar with environmental books and, all of the plan books and stuff, I thought, I'm the perfect person. I can help the city. I'll be the liaison between the city and these, citizens on this panel. And it turned out that as I looked at the plan, I found that it was fraudulent. And at first I thought maybe it was a mistake, and I tried to expose it to the city, thinking that they would maybe drop the plan. And instead they came after me. And that story is in my book, Behind the Green Mask. And through the investigation of that huge redevelopment project, I came to find that, in fact, redevelopment is at the heart of United Nations Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, and that's a big heart. It holds a lot of funding plans, and that is one of them. And during that period of time, as a liberal Democrat, my partner, Kay, my wife, went to a presentation by Michael Shaw, and she came home from that, and she said, "You've got to watch this video." And I watched it, and I said, "You're kidding me." I said, this is some right-wing stuff. I'm not interested. This is ridiculous. And she said, well, why don't you research it and see if there's anything to it? And as I researched it, and I researched it for, probably 8 months very seriously, and I realized that it was true, and that, in fact, the manipulation of us was far advanced, and then, of course, I contacted Michael and became very active in exposing United Nations Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, wrote a book. I traveled for 4 years giving lectures around the United States and out of the country as well, because this is a worldwide plan. It's the same plan all over the world, has different names, but it is all the same. The Hanoi Center Regional Plan 2030 is the same plan as the San Francisco Bay Area Plan Bay Area.
Rosa, I'm glad you brought up the fact that this is not a liberal or a conservative thing. This is literally a fight to the death to save our freedoms, to save our country, to save the right of individuals to have the freedom of choice. This is all about control, and it's top down, and as you said, it's literally every aspect of our life, including the food we eat, the books we read, what we hear on the television or on the radio. It's about controlling literally everything we see, hear, feel, touch, or smell.
That's true, and in fact, we want to be very clear that individual rights are definitely subsumed. They are an enemy of this plan, and so if you take that out to the edge, knowing that, then what you're going to see is regionalization, and that's what we're talking about here. Regionalization destroys your sovereignty. It replaces your individual rights with the rights of the so-called community. And in fact, it takes your vote means nothing because you do not vote for an unelected board or commission. And you don't want to vote for those because we in the United States have city, county, state, and fed, unless you're, unless you're in Louisiana, but it's the same thing. And this is what we're talking about, is the loss of individual rights and sovereignty, and ultimately that goes to nations. It's the end of the nation state. And that is the purpose of this.
In that process,
exactly right.
The key factor for the globalists is to get rid of local government, so that local government substitute can be controlled through a central system, and that means You don't elect your local decision makers. They're appointed by the powers that be in these dark circles, globalism, and that's clearly what's advanced very far in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the COG here is really the prototype for COGs across the country. As soon as ABAG gets its program really rock solid, and they're on the verge of that right now, you'll see it emerge very quickly in Los Angeles and San Diego, and from there it takes off across the country. So people who think that California doesn't set the pace need to re-examine history. Because California's always had a tendency to set the pace on these kinds of cultural renovations. And
that's true, Michael, and
very dangerous.
The fact that, I spent my career with the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans is the rock star of transportation departments across the nation. And of course, that's because there are so many roads in California, because, the 1950s, 60s, the whole road system was really powerfully developed through California. And this is where the councils of government, the metropolitan transportation organizations are sort of rooted in the California, the development of California. And so although everyone thinks that they're at ground zero for United Nations Agenda 21, and ultimately that is true, we are all moving very quickly towards the ultimate. But California does set the pace, and it's incredible that we are here and that we could see it and that we are fighting it with our lawsuit.
Well, the fact that California is setting the standard and the pace for the rest of the country is absolutely, it's been that way for quite a few years in a lot of different ways. And I believe that's why they are using California, because you've got a very liberal group. And Rose, I don't mean your kind of liberal. I'm talking the kind of liberal that believe in collectivism, that believe in socialism, that believe that the rights of individuals should have no importance, and that the collective should be determine happens to the rest. And they're also at the tip of the spear from a technological standpoint, because technocracy really started in California. And so let's talk about regionalism, because this is something that I don't think people really understand. So let's start it. Michael, you've been talking about this for quite a while. Let's start with what regionalism, and you started the conversation, but just how it takes away the rights of individuals to elect their representatives. It literally strips away that right.
Well, it does. I mean, regionalism is the antithesis of the American experiment. Regionalism takes local government and replaces it with a regional structure that reports to a centralized system. And so what you can envision is, take the San Francisco Bay Area. Most people have some general understanding of its geography. It's got a bay that comes off the Pacific Ocean, and it's surrounded by 9 counties, 7.5 million people, and 101 cities. That is the region for what's called ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments. And this is the COG, the Council of Government. Councils of Government were established, amazingly, in the 1950s under Dwight Eisenhower. So he delivered his message when he left office. There's some nefarious things going on. And certainly the establishment of COGs 60 years ago was a major feature in that. Now, COGs were pretty uneventful in their early years, except that they were established in order to create the American freeway system. So while the Constitution gives the federal government authority to establish a post office system, the Constitution never gave the federal government the authority to created an interstate highway system. So COGs were established to do that. Well, that began this sort of concept of regionalism in America, but it's grown a whole lot since the 1950s. Today, COGs take as much control as they want over local government. And in the Bay Area, the AMBAG proposal substitutes all real power at the City Council, all real power at the County Board of Supervisors, with power to be vested and controlled and directed by the COG, the Council of Government. Now, a Council of Government would say, well, the Council of Government consists of mostly elected officials. Well, that's true. They handpick the elected officials that will go along with globalism and world order to sit on the COG. The COG then is intended to control all local government decisions regarding land use. That means that the COG can do things like what ABAG is now doing, which is they create transit centers all around the Bay. And now they say that 80% of all new housing development must be within half a mile of one of these transit centers. Well, that destroys the use and the value of private property everywhere else. And of course, these areas are being swallowed up by the proponents of COGs, certain developers who are partnering with government in a real old-fashioned fascist orientation. They gather up these lands so they can build high-rise, stack and pack that have no garages, because you're within half a mile of the transit center. That means the bus station and train station. This is the master plan being undertaken by globalist organizations here, and as Rosa points out, around the world, all at the same time. So the prototype that exists in the San Francisco Bay Area is the prototype that every other COG, every population across America is covered by a COG, intends to follow. So we've got ourselves in a rather deep hole in respect for the prospects for defining and defending our individual liberties, because that is what the real target of all this action is to take away your independence, take away your automobility, take away your single-family house, stack and pack you, so you can be closely monitored and controlled with the technocracy that exists today and emerges more fully every day that goes by. So America needs to wake up soon, because we're late in this game. And that's what our lawsuit that Rosa and I filed against ABAG was all about. We'll get into more discussion on that as this show goes along.
Mm-hmm. Well, Michael, I have to tell you, I've traveled around the country, and what you're talking about, this stack and pack housing, it's even happening in a place like Bozeman, Montana. Mm-hmm. And what it is 4-story buildings where they have businesses on the first floor, and then living units above. They have they're right on the city sidewalk. They have no private parking whatsoever, and they're doing this all over the country. I went through. I went to the National Convention, Republican Convention in Cleveland when Trump was nominated, and we traveled for literally miles through Cleveland where they have this type of development along the streets, and it's the same. It's cookie cutter. And Rosa, I know you've been battling with this. We've all been fighting this battle, trying to make people wake up to what this so-called sustainable development is all about. You have a unique background. You have a unique perception of this because of you being in real estate, you being in public transportation. Tell our listeners about how you encountered the whole regionalism concept and how we need to try to identify it and deal with it.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's very interesting that when you present this information, and, you know, I was a district branch chief at the Department of Transportation, and so, you know, you go into, we would have management meetings once a month, and I didn't talk about anything but this. And people were mesmerized, and yet here I was right in the center of it. And I would, after my talks, I would be surrounded by mid-level, upper-level management people saying, really, is it really true? Is that what's really going on? And the thing is, with, you know, with a group of people like Americans who are so rooted in the concept of freedom, they truly do not recognize often when they're mid-level people what they're doing, and especially because our educational system is completely geared to indoctrination on acceptance of these plans and on the idea that we're killing the planet. And if you're a good human being, you're going to want to move into an apartment on top of a shop in the center of your tiny town and leave the land out there for the animals. And so this is, you know, it's not only is it a transportation plan, a planning document, but it's also a social document. It's a social, because revolution is bad for business. This is a corporate plan. It's a plan that is designed to create the new man. And we're seeing that with young people now, people who are passive, except when they're in a large crowd and then they feel safe about, you know, maybe throwing a brick through a window. But aside from that, the concept is that you can use the environmental movement to front this plan. It's the green mask for the plan. And regionalization, it's the stepping stone to full globalization. And full globalization is a corporate plan. It's a plan to remove any limit on corporate. So what you're doing is you're training your workforce so that it's fully mobile. You are destroying any jurisdictional boundaries so that you can move your goods from one place to another with all the same harmonization of laws. And you're destroying culture, because culture really gets in the way of globalization, which is standardization of all systems. So the way that we're seeing it right now is through the flooding of different cultures into existing systems. So refugee cultures, whether it's Syrian, whether it's Mexican, whatever it is, breaking through those boundaries so that, and giving, it's a sort of an overall sea change in that you are punished if you think that there's a reason for a national boundary or even for a nation at all. So what happens is that you lose your opportunity. You start to flip the way the population thinks, and the population loses its opportunity to actually put a stop to this. And in fact, is labeled as a hater if you want to control your borders. And your border is the same thing as the door to your home. So regionalization destroys jurisdictional boundaries, and it takes away your vote because you do not vote for a regional board. And this is a stepping stone, as I said, full globalization. And something that, you know, you're right. I'm not your standard person who talks about this, because I come out of a liberal Democrat background. I'm not. I didn't vote for Obama, and I did vote for Donald Trump. Although if I talk about that in a group of people that that I hang out with, it's going to be mayhem. I probably won't even get out of there with the skin on my body. And this is also part of United Nations Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, is the destruction of dissent. This is vital to the plan. It's and this comes out of your educational system, your entertainment system. You see it in government. If you go to these government meetings and you try and anti-Delphi them, you're going to find that you will be marginalized and attacked. So this is a whole life plan. I really want to emphasize that. We're talking here about councils of government because this is the way that it's done. The way you live dictates how you live. And this is what's changing all across the country, whether you're in a small town or a large town. The plan is to move you out of the rural and suburban areas and into the high-density city centers where you could be managed, controlled, and surveilled. And this is what we're fighting.
Yeah, that's very well put. And I saw a recent poll that they did of young college graduates, and about 2/3 of them said that home ownership they thought was totally unimportant, and that ownership of anything was unimportant, and that they thought it was much more important for them to have the freedom to travel. And boy, that is a really, really awesome point of what you were talking about. And yet at the same time, these people need to understand travel will be incredibly limited when they get their way. When UN Agenda 21 is totally implemented, you will be allowed to travel where they say you can travel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And that's the idea of the high-speed train. High-speed rails, of course, it's designed to fail. It's designed to sink your economy. There is no high-speed rail in the United States for a good reason. But what we're going to see, of course, is that if you're not on that transit line, you're not going to be able to go anywhere. You don't have a private vehicle. You can't afford it. I don't know if wherever you are in the United States or around the world and you're listening to me, you're going to see a lot more young people who aren't quite that young anymore. Maybe people in their 30s that are on a skateboard going down the street and really kind of feeling righteous about it. And these are people who have lost their mobility. And this is more and more, the watchword of this plan is the loss of personal freedom. And, cars, yes, cars are terrible. Things need to change with the combustion engine, et cetera. But this is the green mask. That's why I called my book The Green Mask, because they can use that environmental movement to mask this plan, which is a totalitarian plan.
Yes, very definitely. It is all about control, and Michael alluded a little bit to the technocracy. You mentioned corporatism. That's all tied together because under this one world program, there will be no freedom of choice. There will be a total top-down control by technocrats who I think are of a communist mindset. I have to say that. I see communism throughout this whole process, and it looks to me like we are losing our country in a way that I don't think anybody could have envisioned 30, 40, 50 years ago.
I know, you're right. This is, if you look at the collapse of the Soviet Union, such as it was, and it's almost like a metastasized cancer. And it sounds ridiculous to me, even having it come out of my mouth. I hate to say it, and this is part of what has happened, especially I would say since the McCarthy era, because popularly, the idea that one needs to take this kind of thinking seriously was definitely shot down after the post-McCarthy era. And so in this country, people are feeling like, hey, there's nothing to worry about, and wow, isn't Ocasio-Cortez really cute? And this is, hey, it's not really communism, it's democratic socialism, you guys. It's a great thing. It means we're not going to have to pay our school debt. And here's this little old guy who's going to be president and tell us everything's okay. And so they definitely are riding the public relations train here. And this is something that, we are, those of us who are talking about the truth and what's real, objective reality, are not given a mouthpiece, not given an opportunity to speak out. And we are marginalized and shamed. And this is something you've got to be brave to fight this. This is your call to action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Michael, I'd like you to tell our listeners a little bit about some of the various plans that are now being implemented throughout California. Now it's no longer just the Bay Area governments. Now it's the Los Angeles area, it's the San Diego area, it's literally the whole state from San Francisco south. And tell our listeners about some of these plans that they've got in the works right now.
Well, they're all really just takeoffs on Plan Bay Area. Los Angeles has a plan that COG covers Orange County and Ventura County, San Bernardino County. And, the plan's the same thing. Everything involves transit centers and high-rise stack and pack housing and, the marginalization of suburbs, the plan not to allow single-family construction. Everything is the same thing, and it's not just through California. You've got COGs in every major metropolitan area. That are sitting and waiting to adopt versions of the same plan that you're seeing in San Francisco. And, it's just a ton of shoes ready to drop. And you can look at the Bay Area, again, as the model, and there's a major artery. Anybody who's been to the Bay Area knows of El Camino Real. It runs from San Jose to San Francisco. And the Plan Bay Area 2040 program calls for the El Camino Real, a 6-lane road, to eventually be developed such that you live along the El Camino Real in a high-rise and you walk your way to work, because the technology companies will be scattered all along El Camino Real, and the highway itself will be for public vehicles only, meaning no private automobiles will be allowed on El Camino Real. We're going to call it the Grand Boulevard, and you won't be able to drive your car. Now, that's a typical sustainable development, Agenda 21 implementation. It devalues cars and people's personal transportation models. It puts people close to their work so they can walk to work. And it makes life grand and easy for those who want to control, put everybody in one center so they're easily monitored and controlled. There's nothing different about the LA program or the San Diego program, and all the other COGs in California are in place to really control their populations and cause the people who live in more rural areas of California to move into the urban areas. I mean, the ultimate plan under 2050, there's an organization that is very powerful in the sustainable development movement, is that there be 13 metropolises across the United States holding all the American population. Now, people like myself can think, well, that's convenient. That's an easy way to meet the Agenda 21 population reduction target. The official document under Agenda 21 from the United Nations calls for an 85% reduction in human population levels. How more easily can you do that than to put everybody into small geographic districts that are then subject to all kinds of possibilities for population reduction? That's what, at the core, the entire Agenda 21 movement is about. about human population reduction. And all these steps in between are to get us into a position where it's much easier to do that. That's why I think that the Orwellian 1984 is a prelude to Wells's futuristic dystopian novel, where people don't reproduce. The human population is reproduced in test tubes, and where people are totally subservient to a master rule. And that's what Agenda 21 intends. That's what the population reduction program is all about. And that's why I think that continental wars are necessary before they get their final stride in order to reduce population before they go into their globalist framework of government. And, I think that America, as the leader of the world, Americans, the most powerful element in the world today, must rise up and throw off this foreign concept called Agenda 21, which is dominating your town. You don't have to live in the Bay Area to come to the realization that Agenda 21 policies are controlling your community right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Michael, you're absolutely spot on with all that, and I think the fact that we are talking about a huge reduction in human population, most people don't understand just exactly what that means, that we are going to go from 7.5 billion people down to fewer than 1 billion people in a matter of 50 years. That's not going to happen gently. That's going to happen because these people have a plan to get rid of people.
Correct.
Rosa, I'd love to get you back into the conversation. You've watched this whole process, and you use the term metastasize. That's an excellent term, because that's exactly what happened with the so-called fall of the Soviet Union, was that it was put underground. And in fact, communism has never died. It's been strengthening, and you can see that by the fact that so many countries around the world that were free countries 50 years ago are now living under some form of communism, or certainly very controlled socialism. Let's talk about what Agenda 21 is going to do to rural America, because it's an area that I think people need to realize we will not have a rural America like we see it now. And what better way to control food than get rural Americans off the land and destroy the kind of non-corporate farming that allows us to be the breadbasket of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent observation, and this is one that, of course, I have traveled all around the United States and talked to people in large cities as well as small cities. I've been invited all over, and I was just looked down at something that I was working on, and it reminded me of when I was in Kodiak, Alaska. I was invited to speak to the people in Kodiak, Alaska, who were completely unaware of the existence of the councils of government, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission there, the MPO. And rural cities, rural areas, they often lag behind cities in the implementation of smart growth. And, of course, that's because they truly don't have the population to support that monolithic building that's sitting in the center of town that's basically sinking your economy, because it was paid for with your property tax dollars, or infrastructure was given to the developer because this is what smart growth is. It's not just a design style, it's an ideology. And you might choose to live in an apartment on top of a shop. I don't care. You know, if the developer wants to build that and he's got the money for it and they can pay for their infrastructure and stuff, so what? But this isn't about the building. This is about not having a choice, and this is about having your government agencies actually requiring that kind of construction in transit centers. And transit villages, that was formerly called Your Town, and now it's a transit village. It's government-sponsored, government-subsidized housing built right close to whatever your transportation method is there. And these plans are all the same plan, of course, as I said. And if you want, to look at the 11 megaregions in the United States, you can go to America2050.org, which is a plan of the Regional Plan Institute, which is funded by the Rockefeller and Ford Foundations. And so the rural people are dependent on many things. Often people living in rural areas do many different things to make ends meet. It gets harder and harder out there. And when you have your local governments who are overrun by smart growth advocates who are being leaned on by their councils of government or their regional transportation organizations to have to build high-density development on their little bus line there, then what happens is that you can have your economies in those small areas sunk completely in a fairly short time. You have people who are not able to pay increased property taxes or parcel taxes to fund this. You have your property taxes funneled off to pay bond brokers that are advancing the money for these plans. And then you have, no money for infrastructure, so you can't maintain your roads, you can't keep your post office open, you can't keep your fire guys going, you can't get your sheriff out there, and pretty soon you have less and less people out there, which means the tax burden has to be carried by fewer and fewer people, and then you have people leaving the rural areas. And this the goal is to get people out of the rural and suburban areas and into the dense city centers where they can be more easily managed and surveilled. And we're talking about true surveillance. We are talking about many different, whether it's private corporations, whether you're paying your Xfinity Comcast to surveil you inside of your house, which people stupidly do. All of the things that people do. Of course, right now, you have the choice. So certainly there's...
Rosa, I hear the commercial break coming up.
Oh,
I
sorry.
don't want to interrupt, but would you please hold that thought and we'll pick it up right on the other side of the break.
Sure.
Serving the planet. The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and today we've got a terrific program with two very, very special guests. Michael Shaw, who is really leading the charge with another great guest, Rosa Corey, and they have a lawsuit that they filed in the state of California to challenge ABAG, and there's been some really interesting things that have been part of that whole process, and I think Michael will be talking about that later in the discussion. But Rosa, I want to give you a chance. I'm sorry I had to cut you off for the commercial break, but I want to give you a chance to finish your thoughts, because you're right on with everything you're saying. This is all about control, every aspect of our lives.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think what I really want to be sure to say, and often when I'm interviewed, this gets squeezed into the very end, and I'm, as the credits are rolling, I'm trying to say it. And so I want to tell people that it's really important not to feel like you're helpless and not to feel that there's nothing you can do. This is quite monolithic, but there are a lot of things that you can do. You can withdraw your support for groups that you're paying or volunteering for, if you research them and find that they are supporting United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development. So, don't give your money. Don't round your grocery bill up and give the money to some unnamed nonprofit. And, don't join the Bike Coalition. Don't join the Global Justice Center. If you're not collaborating with this plan, you're fighting it. You don't want to cooperate. You don't want to give your personal data. You don't want to allow yourself to be surveilled. And this is a very important part of the plan. So people need to recognize that, yes, you have a voice in this. You have an opportunity here. You have a chance to fight this plan. You can't, it's necessary. You need to step up and be part of it. All of us together need to work together to fight through civil disobedience, through non-compliance, through speaking out, and also educating yourself and others. This is our power, is that we are able still to educate ourselves and to speak out, use that information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're absolutely right on the money with the observation that we still have the right. Legally, we do. The fact is that they've taken away most of our rights of free speech and rights to speak out and to be opposed to their plans. But they are also the kind of people that are too gutless to admit just exactly what their plan is. And therefore, we still have the perception that we have freedom in this country. And it's important that people wake up and start using their power, their so-called free speech, and start being part of the solution instead of just acquiescing and continuing to be part of the problem.
Mm-hmm. I have... In my book, Behind the Green Mask, there are 20 pages on what you can do, and a lot of that stuff is really fun. I show you how to anti-Delphi a government meeting where you're being indoctrinated and directed to choose the smart growth model for the center of your town. So a lot of, it's true that this is really, it can be very upsetting, but it can be a lot of fun and very empowering to actually take your power and fight back against it. And that's, Michael and I decided to sue because we felt that this was a plan that could be fought on the legal stage. And I think it's very important to use the legal system that we have, and in order to show ourselves and everyone else what it is that we're doing, and also to point up that there's a lot of injustice in the system, built into the system. But I think we have an opportunity, we have had an opportunity to get the information out to people and to fight it, because this plan is a real plan and it is wrong, and on so many levels, and that's what our fight is about.
Yeah, and Rose, one of the things that I think we really need to understand is that they're using all these forces to try to get us to fight one another rather than recognizing the people that are at the center of the plan to destroy freedom in the world. And the fact is, this is not a liberal conservative fight. This isn't a fight between people of different ideas and different beliefs. This is a fight to steal everything we have, and it's time that we get together with people who ideologically may not be exactly like us, but believe in freedom. And that's why it's so important that we recognize the truth behind the green mask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. And it's, that's one of the things that I have encountered going around the country, speaking often to large, I've been in many large churches and spoken for Republican groups, anarchist groups, libertarian groups, and I've come out, I'm gay, I'm pro-choice, pro-gay marriage, liberal, and I've been welcomed. And I think that people who, and this is really unusual, but it's not unusual in conservative areas, but believe it or not, I am completely a pariah in liberal areas and cannot speak freely. And I think that the country has been polarized, and this is the part of the green mask, in fact, is to keep you from hearing the truth and to stop you from thinking that anything that you hear might be true by smearing the person who's telling you the truth. So I think, it's true you have to be brave, but on the other hand, I think that if you have the vision in your mind of how powerful the United States is and can be, and how wonderful and beautiful it is to be under the Constitution of the United States, I think we need to protect it because, in fact, that's what we're fighting. Plan Bay Area is a violation of the United States and the California Constitutions. And this is the main reason, I think, why we're out there fighting it, because we have a beautiful document that we need to uphold and support.
Right, we absolutely do. I'm surprised. We have a caller that called in. I thought we had our lines pretty well tied up with this call, but apparently we have a caller. Caller, do you have a question for one of our guests?
Well, the lady who wrote that Behind the Green Mask book, boy, that's 10 years old, and I'm glad, you're still on that drum, as it were, getting people to try to look into it, rather than, as you were saying, to continue to be hoodwinked by that Delphi technique. I like how you think, when you go, how to be an anti-Delphi techniquist in, in crowds of people that they already kind of have us in a corral. But some of us, jump out of there and say, well, what about our sovereignty, for an example? Don't all of the countries, and not just my beloved state of California, or in my case, Pennsylvania, or my beloved country, America, don't all of the countries lose their sovereignty? I don't think that's right. Anyway, there's just such a lot afoot, and I'm glad to see there are people that are making the thieves, because Dan said it right, it's about stealing everything from everybody. I'm glad there are people who aren't going along peacefully, and I just want to thank you and commend you. You're good at it too.
Well, thank you, and I hope that you're using those principles and the tools in that book to take back your town there in Pennsylvania.
It's lovely how it is. Like, I call these thieves Luciferians, but they wisely know, all politics is local, and that doesn't just apply to thieves. It applies to people that love, life and truth and honesty too. So yeah, we all have to work, with ourselves first, and then with the people that are around us routinely. And then things naturally spread. And like I say, yeah. So I am using some of those tools, and I enjoy finding some that are sharp and keen, and they work well. And I thank you for putting them in the book and reviewing them for us here.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, caller. I appreciate your input. Thank you. Michael, I'd like to get you back on this call because you've been unusually silent. I want to make sure that we start talking about the lawsuit and what's been happening with that lawsuit that you have against ABAG, and maybe talk about what some of the crazy policies that have been used against your court battle.
Well, I'll do that. I also have on the line here that he'll join us as we progress. Tim Kasuni, who is Rosa and my lawyer. He's been my longtime lawyer. He's the man who has handled our case against ABAG. But to introduce the audience to that subject and where we're at, where we've been, let me make just a synopsis, and then we can bring Tim Kasuni into the conversation as well. In 2014, it was actually Rosa who said, we're up against it. The only thing we can count on is a lawsuit that we win. And that propelled she and I to look around on how we might do that. And finally we proceeded and filed a state superior court action against ABAG for constitutional violations and a whole host of dynamics. And just to sort of summarize how that proceeded, we got to a trial court judge in Alameda County, that's the city of Oakland area, and this judge said that the statute that ABAG used to implement its One Bay Area program, Arnold Schwarzenegger statute, authorized the COGs to do what ABAG has done. And in that statute, it said that ABAG can proceed so long as they met certain conditions of shall have, the word in the statute was shall, not may. Certain conditions shall exist before they can begin this program. And it was clear, even the ABAG consultants opined that those conditions didn't exist. Just one of those factors was that the financing necessary to implement ABAG was widely acknowledged to include the repeal of California's Proposition 13. And of course that hasn't happened. And so how was the court going to get around that and many other similar shortfalls that ABAG faced in this Plan Bay Area program? Well, the trial court judge, in a rather unique and one-time shot, opined that the word shall means may. And he concluded that since Prop 13 may get overruled, that the plan conformed to Arnold Schwarzenegger's statutory authority. So it was Schwarzenegger who brought this law into place. He was a big-time Agenda 21 fan, as was Pete Wilson, a Republican before him, and certainly Gray Davis, the guy who was thrown out of office. He was a big Agenda 21 fan. So we've had about 30 years of Agenda 21 supporters in the governorship of California, and certainly the current governor fits that bill. So when the trial court allowed the plan to proceed, we went to the state appellate court, fully briefed the case. The appellate court sat on it for 3 years, made no move. There were several other cases against ABAG. They were all blown out quickly. But ours just sat there until about 6 weeks ago, when the appellate court ruled the case was too old and that it was moot and no decision would be rendered. And
You know, Michael, I remember you talking to me about that, how it was just languishing and they weren't doing a thing with it. Isn't that amazing how they managed to stretch this thing out, and then when they've stretched it out what they think is a reasonable amount of time to use the argument, then they come back and say that it's moot because there's been too much time passed, and therefore it's no longer relevant. That's absolutely astounding.
Well, that's putting the cart before the horse. There's no question about that. The court failed. It makes one think the California courts may be fixed. And so we're now faced a situation with appealing to the state Supreme Court, which we have done. And, state Supreme Court was mostly backed by Jerry Brown. And listeners can take from that what they might. And we have Tim Cassuti on the line here, and he can carry us more fully into the legal alternatives that we're facing now and how we may proceed in an effort to waylay ABAG from remaking the Bay Area as a prelude to the remake of your area. Anybody in the audience, all of America is to be remade in accordance with this Sustainable Development Agenda 21 prototype. It's California.
Okay. Michael, I don't want to interrupt, but we have a caller on the line that I want to try to. He's tried to call in a couple of times and then cut off. I want to make sure that we try to give him a chance to speak to us. Caller, do you have a question for our guest today?
Yes, I do. I met Rosa a couple years back through another patriot in Northern California when I lived there. I lived in the Windsor, California area there, James Bennett. So, Rosa, thank you for coming on and talking about this topic here. I am also an RBN, Republic Broadcasting Network host. Would love to have either of you two on my show here in the future. So let me give you an email real quick. You can drop me a line. We can schedule something. Off the Beaten Path, steve@gmail.com. And I noticed this living in little Windsor, California. The Agenda 21 taking off very, very fast with the minimized housing, and it's quite consuming. And I ended up leaving California within the last year, live down here in Central Florida now. But I understand that the masses will not go along with this very easy. They're going to have to be pushed into this Agenda 21 situation here. The situation will have to be created, and we've seen that already in Northern California with the fires and the floods and the drought, and somebody pulling out a lizard and throwing it down, saying it's a rare lizard. Now we need to kick you off this land. So they're going to have to be corralled and pushed into this agenda. I've been working also a little bit with Paul Preston in the past, very in tune with what's going on with Agenda 21. I'm sure you both have worked with him also, but I had a question for Paul. I haven't reached him in a while. He's been on the road, but maybe I can ask either you two. With this last big flood in the Russian River area here, Guerneville, Sebastopol, and those areas there, it's interesting that if you look on the map, the flooding is just in these little small regions here. And when I talked to Paul Preston last, of course, he's looking for the new California agenda here, trying to split up California. Have you both either noticed any aerial spraying, any kind of cloud seeding to create this monsoon of rains in these areas? I mean, I was wondering if the week before this all happened, it just seemed so weird that it just targeted these certain areas and nothing else was touched.
Well,
I think weather manipulation
has
been a factor for a long time. And I think there's been a lot of evidence and a lot of instances of where the weather has been directed, whether you're talking California or Florida or anywhere else. But certainly in both those states it's been more evident than others. Here in California, they had, through HARP up in Alaska, were able to create high-pressure systems that caused California to go through a very extreme drought here in the last decade that lasted many years. And what they would do is just thwart all rain patterns to the north and to the south of California, leaving us high and dry for a long time. And when the gates were opened, we had some heavy rains that have caused some bad results. And I can't point to specifics on that, but I have little doubt that there's been manipulation of weather patterns that have produced that, and I think that are producing conditions all around the country, certainly in the Gulf, that play into the climate change agenda of the advocates of Agenda 21. So it all, I think, does tie together. What would you say, Rosa?
Rosa, I'd like to hear your opinion on that, too.
Well, it takes a lot to break a large economy. And, we've heard over the years that California was the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world. And so to break an economy like that, you need to make it so that people can't insure their property, they can't develop their property, and they can't use their property. And so what happens when you have disasters is that you have you're dissuading people from coming to the area, and you're destroying the ability of people who are in the area to continue. And I think this is what we've been seeing over the years here in California, and it's definitely an area of research that has there is a lot of information out there, and I think that what we need to do is to recognize that while people are, there are many more people who are living in the cities, and those people care less and less about people who are out in the rural areas because they're not there. And so they don't own property, they don't grow food, and they don't care if you can't be out there. In fact, they'd prefer it if those areas were wilderness areas so that they can go hiking once a month out there. And this is one of the elements of United Nations Agenda 21, and this is why, to remove people from the rural areas, and this is a way of doing it.
Well,
Yeah,
again,
that's a really good point. And the other part of that is that when you're talking about getting people off the land like that, you're eliminating the food source as well.
And I also co-host with John Stabmiller on his show here and there also. So I'd love to have both of you on the show and talk about this again.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay. Michael, I'd like to have you bring your attorney, Tim, on the call, and let's talk about what's happening with the lawsuit and where we see this thing going.
Well, welcome, Tim.
Yes. Hi, Michael. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you all. And as Michael said, I have known Rosa and Michael for many years. Dan, it's a pleasure to be on your show. I think all of your listeners are really lucky to have Michael and Rosa give their insights. And I can tell you, I've been to day-long seminars, and what Michael and Rosa have described is just sort of the tip of the iceberg of what's going on. So I encourage all the listeners to seek out more information, go on the website that Michael has, and really delve into the details on this. But to give you an update on the litigation, I think Michael did a pretty good synopsis of where we're at. I think we did have, as your listeners may know, in California, you basically have three levels of court. You have the first court, which is the trial court. And our trial court was the Alameda County Superior Court. And we had a judge, a writ judge, that in a nutshell made a ruling that the language in SB 375, that's the Sustainable Community Strategies Act, that the word shall really should mean a may, meaning that it's really not required of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments to come up with a plan that will, in actuality, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They just need to do one that it just may accomplish that. It's not required to. The problem with that is you're essentially uprooting the entire land use system and process to achieve a result that is a pie in the sky result, which is really what it is. And it's not me saying that. It's not Michael and Rosa saying that. ABAG commissioned its own independent feasibility economic study, which concluded what I'm saying, that the ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to levels in SB 375 cannot be achieved without so many upheavals in our political system as to make it essentially a pie-in-the-sky plan. And just to give you one example that I think Michael mentioned, one example is abolishing Proposition 13, which is just one of many assumptions that the plan makes in order to achieve its target level. So not only is this uprooting our system, it's being done to achieve a result that is a pie-in-the-sky result. And we can put aside for the moment whether a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions is even wise or necessary or supported by the science. That's a whole other issue, probably for an entire other show. We can even assume, for purposes of argument, that it might be a good idea to do that. The plan will not do that. So you're getting an upheaval of our system for a plan that will have no benefit, which is just making it, just adding fuel to the fire and making it even worse than it already is. Back to the lawsuit. So we had a negative result in the trial court, so we appealed it, the Court of Appeal, which is the second level of review in California. The briefing in the Court of Appeal was finished over 3 years ago. The Court of Appeal sat on the case, sat on it, sat on it, sat on it, and then the plan was changed and slightly modified to a new plan. And so ABAG's lawyer said, hey, it's a new plan now, therefore our original case is moot. Well, we said, no, it's not moot, and even if it is moot, there are established exceptions to the mootness doctrine. And one, for example, is just a case out of San Diego a year or two ago with a similar type of plan where the Court of Appeal said, no, it's not moot because the issues are likely to reoccur. And that's exactly what we have here. The language in SB 375, that is the issue of whether a shall means shall or whether a shall means may or try to, that legal issue will reoccur over and over and over again because SB 375 is a statute that has to be read and interpreted every time there's going to be a modified plan. So we explained all this to the Court of Appeal. It took them a year and a half, another year and a half to even decide whether the case was moot or not. And despite our opposition about a couple months ago, as Michael said, the Court of Appeal said, yes, it's moot. So between the time briefing was done and the time that the court decided to say, is the case moot or not, was about 3 years. We then sought a rehearing in the Court of Appeal explaining why they're wrong. That was denied, and now we are seeking review in the California Supreme Court, which is the third level of review in California. And basically what we're saying to the California Supreme Court is that this is an extremely important question of law. And that question of law is to have the Supreme Court decide whether a plan like this, which will affect statistically 9 counties and 101 cities, that's the Bay Area region that the plan is subject to, whether this type of a plan evil deals with such important questions of law that the California Supreme Court should grant review. So obviously we're encouraging the court to do that. Our petition for review is currently pending in the California Supreme Court. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say how great a chance we have. Any case you're trying to get California Supreme Court review is difficult. And so we're hopeful, we're optimistic. We do have some other options available, but they're a little even more limited than the California Supreme Court. One would be the U.S. Supreme Court, but that we have yet to decide whether we're going to take that route. So I'd encourage all your listeners to keep your fingers crossed and let's hope that the Supreme Court takes up this hugely important case. And I think that, Rosa and Michael are right. California is a template for the nation on many levels, both political and legal. And in California in particular, the Bay Area is sort of a template for the rest of the state. And that's one of the arguments we made to the California Supreme Court. You have to take this case, you have to explain and solidify the statutory language and not let these plans be drafted and adopted with pie-in-the-sky statistics and admittedly flawed economic feasibility analysis. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. And that's a synopsis of the lawsuit.
And I might add, Dan, that we have a website, Globalization of California, and at that website we have all the court filings, and we do some summaries of the court status, and we update that from time to time. And for all listeners, the best source for information on this dynamic in California that will come to your state if we don't stop it here is best obtained by viewing that website. It's globalizationofcalifornia.com, and I encourage all the listeners to check that out and refer back from time to time so that they're up to date on this subject and how it's proceeding.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to applaud you and Rosa. Tim, thank you for kind of getting us updated on where the case was at. But Michael and Rosa, the fact that you are out of your own pockets really funding this effort to try to save America, and that is absolutely phenomenal, and you deserve the support of the nation. And I want to leave an opportunity for both of you to talk about how you can be supported in your efforts. So let's do that now, because as Rosa says, a lot of times this stuff gets pushed to the very end and then it doesn't get said.
Well, I'll just pick it up. I'd say that although my group, the Post Sustainability Institute, pretty much ran out of money a long time ago, and although we do have some people who continue to support, do financial support, it's very minimal, and Michael has covered the majority of the cost on this lawsuit, or Michael's supporters, people who have contributed. So I think when you're looking at making contributions, you want to go to the Globalization of California law website. And for us, for our group, you can take a look at Democrats Against UN Agenda 21.com, and also postsustainabilityinstitute.org, as well as many, many YouTube videos of speeches that I've given around the country and around the world, as well as magazine interviews and radio interviews. And often, I was going to mention to Tim, I gave a continuing education of the bar lecture I was invited by the Bar Association of Placer County in California to give a continuing education of the bar lecture. And that was amazing to me. But mostly you'll have attack articles written, and those are very interesting interviews to listen to. The American Bar Association interviewed me, and that's a terrific video to listen to watch. I think that if you want to get more information, there is so much information out there. We have a tremendous page of just source information, and I don't ever make anything up. If I can't get the source documents on it, I don't want to speculate. So we have tremendous information on our websites, and I really encourage people to support Michael at Globalization of California and our group, Democrats Against UN, Agenda21.com. Of course, Democrats are few and far between who can see this plan and understand it. And I don't want to take any flack for my registration as a Democrat. Mainly, I do it now just to annoy people. But I think that we need to work together. If that's ever going to be possible, we need to start it now.
Well, I think that the whole world needs to see this issue not as a matter of Democrats, Republicans. It's a question of globalists and non-globalists. We are the non-globalists. We are the Americans fighting globalism. That's where the real fight is. The fight between Democrats and Republicans is the nonsense fight that goes on amongst establishment people. And if we follow them, we will fall into the globalist trap, because Democrats and Republicans have centered themselves along this globalist routine for a long, long time.
You're absolutely right, Michael, and that is it. Is that it's globalists versus people who are free people, and so your political affiliation is completely irrelevant to this, and it's just being used to turn us and polarize us.
That's right.
Yeah, no, that's right, guys. And it's really what it boils down to is that they figured out a long time ago they've got to demonize groups and people, and the best way to beat your opposition is by identifying and demonizing, and then getting other people to battle back and forth and ignore what's really going on around us. And the truth is they've lived behind the curtain for a very long time by getting us to fight one another. And it's time that we wake up and realize this isn't about Democrats and Republicans. Michael, you're absolutely right. This is about globalists versus people who believe in our independence and our national sovereignty.
And the principles on which we were founded, which are based on individual rights, and this collectivist notion that Agenda 21 adopts is the exact opposite of that. And, if you've got children and you're sending them to government schools, just know that you're sending them to the indoctrination camps of the New World Order, where they learn this stuff as the model, and they learn that America history is nothing special. The American experiment is nothing unique, and that the whole concept needs to be abandoned for world order.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Education is indoctrination. I don't know if people know that there's an active group called the Association for Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, and that group is one of the many NGO cutouts for the UN, and they pay teachers. They're training change agents. They pay teachers to insert sustainability principles into every course they teach, regardless of what it is. It could be, sewing or PE, whatever it is. They pay you to insert the sustainability principles. And this is, the entire educational system is totally predicated on indoctrination for sustainability, and that's the plan. So that's what we're fighting. This is the biggest fight you'll ever be in. This is your opportunity in your life to really step up and make a difference, and to put down your social media who marries who or whatever that stuff is, and get into the real stuff. It's going to really vitalize your life, excite you, make you a very interesting person to talk to, and really make you feel that, yes, you matter, and your voice is important and must be heard. This is our opportunity. This is where we step up, and I encourage people to take this on.
I think you're exactly right, Rosa.
You're right on with that. I have to tell you guys, and Michael, you've been to my place up in Montana. You know where my ranch is at up in Montana. And if people think for 1 second that this isn't in every single corner of our country, I can tell you it is, because I was a county commissioner in Madison County, Montana, and we couldn't be much more rural than we are. Our county planner happened to be an APA coordinator. She was the state president of the American Planning Association, and she was moving very, very openly to try to implement a lot of Agenda 21 programs, the so-called wildlife corridors, and the fact that she was openly telling people, you know, you can't afford to live out here because we can't provide infrastructure way out here, so you need to move into another area. She was very subtle about it, but it was very obvious what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is, and you know, the American Planning Association had a 12-week-long boot camp that they put on several years ago to train people to fight us, actually to fight us. And they said, you want to inoculate elected officials, indoctrinate your council people. These were invocations to planners. And planners believe that they are the guardians of the future. This is what they say on the American Planning Association website. They have a vision of themselves as being these powerful people that are guiding the future, these faceless, mainly young people who are indoctrinated into this themselves, and their entire focus is on shutting us down. And, you know, this is like a science fiction story, right? Who would believe this? And this is one thing they emphasize, is that since it is so unbelievable, that we can be marginalized. So you need to fight that. You need to, first of all, find out what's going on. It's like being on a plane and they tell you, you know, if you've got a kid next to you, you want to put your oxygen mask on before you put theirs on. It's the same thing here. You want to put on your education before you go out there, because you need to be clear and understand what's going on. And we've made it really easy for you, Michael and I. We have a lot of fabulous, very clear information that will help you identify what it looks like in your town and then how to fight it. And that's what you want to do.
This is Tim again, the attorney. If I could just chime in as a follow-through with what Rosa just said. You know, one of the other aspects of the lawsuit is to solidify and apply our state constitution. And there's a provision in the state constitution. It's called the Homeland or Home Rule Guarantee. It's in Article 11 of the state constitution. And essentially what it says is that there's autonomy and independence of individual cities and counties in California. In particular, autonomy and independence with respect to land use. And you'll note if you read these Plan Bay Area documents, they have no choice but to acknowledge that. So you'll see a lot of language in there saying, you know, what we're coming up with is not binding on cities and counties. And in fact, that is true. It is not binding. And I think at the local level, it's extremely important that city council members and board of supervisors members understand that they do still have the power and the control. What happens is you have federal transportation funding, billions of dollars, and I think about 14 or 15 billion is funneled through the Metropolitan Transportation Commission to cities and counties. So what happens is they'll say in these plans, yeah, you have autonomy, but if you want this slice of the transportation money pie, go along and do what we want you to do. And that's really coercion. And that's another aspect of our lawsuit, which is this concept of coercing otherwise independent cities and counties to go along with regionalism in order to receive a slice of federal transportation funds. That's the problem on a practical financial basis. But the principle, I think, it needs to be emphasized, which is, at the end of the day, your local city council and your board of supervisors don't have to play the game. They don't. They're not legally, at the end of the day, they're not legally required to. And I think the more we can emphasize that they do have the power, that's just another way to try to instill and fight back on this process. But you raised a good point, Linda. Thank you.
You know, Tim, I have to say, you're absolutely right, but part of the problem is that so many of these county supervisors and these local officials don't have the backbone to stand up for their citizens, and they acquiesce to a system that allows them to get reelected because they look like Santa Claus, and if they're delivering the goods, and it happens to be federal funding and largesse that takes away your rights, they don't care as long as they can get reelected. And that's a sad statement for what's happening in America, but it's absolutely the way things are.
And that's where we come in as people, as the electorate, because if you make clear to your elected officials that you will support them if they reject those federal funds, and that you will reelect them if they reject those federal funds, you need to show up. You need to be there. You need to let them know that you will support them, because that's a career killer to reject huge grants, federal grants. But that's what we need to do, is support our elected officials when they turn against United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely accurate. And Rose, I want to, we're going to be running out of time here shortly, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about what your plans are and what you're working on, and give you a little bit of opportunity to talk about your book again, because I know it's had a huge impact in this country, and I want to make sure you get a chance to spend a few minutes talking about what you're working on.
Well, great. Well, thank you. It's true. Behind the Green Mask, my book, it was a bestseller, and it still does very well, and that really surprised me. I didn't expect that. I thought, like anyone who self-publishes a book, I thought, maybe 10 people would buy it. And I think what that really indicated to me, and why I did spend 4 years on the road, is that people, it resonates. I hate to use that term, but it does. People see it, they recognize it, they know that it's real. And they wanted something really simple and clear that could help them actually fight the reality in their town. And they wanted to know what it looked like, because it doesn't come called United Nations Agenda 21. And even when it's sustainable development, like Tim was saying, Senate Bill 375 here in California is called Sustainable Communities Strategies. But, who's going to know that? I mean, you really have to look at these things. So it helps identify what the plan looks like and who the local players are. And that's what we need, because the plan is a top-down plan. It goes global, regional, neighborhood. None of those are elected. None of them are really representative. But you need to know that this plan starts with your neighborhood association, and you need to fight it there. What I'm doing now is I'm working on a project that exposes how this works socially and what the new man is. And this ties in, of course, with the Green New Deal, with the popularity of people like Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, and why this is the case and what can be done about it. And so I think this is very important because while, as I said earlier, the way you live and where you live dictates who you are in a lot of situations, what you care about and what's important to you. But also, who you are is dictated to you by your social structure and by, your entertainment structure, your educational system. And that needs, that's a very important part of this plan. Culture is the fourth pillar of Agenda 21, and we need to take a look at that and see what it looks like. So that's what I'm working on, and I think it's very important that that people understand the full 360-degree view of what this is going to do to us, what it is doing to us. I'm not going to pretend that it's not happening right now. We are really in a very serious situation. We need to rescue our country and ourselves because, you've got a few. I want to say that, H.G. Wells and George Orwell and Aldous Huxley, they were all dystopian novels that they wrote, and they were socialists, and they saw the end game. They saw the logical end. But what you want to do is you want to block that. You want to stop that. You want to break through that grip, and you want to recreate the reality of what it means to be an engaged citizen.
Yeah, our founders never intended us to be the kind of sheep that we've become. They intended for us to be involved. Apparently, we have a lady in Texas who has a question. We'll give her a chance. We're running close on time here. Caller, would you please state your question, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, I guess basically my question is, here in Texas, the development has just been going crazy. And I know that our elected officials, at the local level, feel like their hands are tied. They're just trying to put out fires with the bad traffic and, people complaining that they can't get anywhere. It's just been really bad. And we're actually moving in a lot of people from your neck of the woods.
Yeah, I think
how do they respond to that? How do they refuse federal money? Because that's what I see the problem being.
Well, a lot of those transportation dollars are being used for road diets. So you'll see that a lot of those streets now, no matter what town you're in Texas, and I've been in Texas many, many times speaking, you'll see the roads are narrowed from 2 or 4 lanes down to a road with a median and then a bike lane, and maybe they're even taking part of your street to have tables out there for the restaurants that are around town. And this is called road diets, and this is part of the Smart Growth Plan. What you need to do is have your elected officials be as educated as possible so they understand they're not just looking at each individual grant that they're going to reject, that they reject the entire package and that they can, articulately express to your town why it is they're doing it. Because these transportation grants are really about destroying your ability to get from one side of your town to the other. That's really what it's about. It's about getting you into public transportation that may not even be there, but your tax dollars are going to go for it, and they're going to create the gridlock so that you demand it. That's the plan.
Okay.
Well, thank you, caller. Michael, I want to give you a chance to say a few words at the end of this conversation. We're running out of time. So,
well, I just say that people need to get aware of Agenda 21 generally. You can go to Freedom Advocates. That's our old website that used to be very active, and then.
Oh, that sounds like maybe we lost Michael.
That's
well, I want to thank our listeners. Rosa, I want to thank you. This has been a fascinating discussion. I hope you'll come on again. We are, as a podcast, we're reaching out around the world, and recently we found out that we've got people listening from 20 different countries around the world, and I'm just fascinated that we're getting that kind of reach. We get a lot of reach around the country as well. But please consider coming back. Let's continue this dialogue. And Michael, I don't know if you're back on the call, you and Tim, but thank you both for being such fantastic guests, and I hope we can get you back on soon.
Good. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Dan, and let's move America toward the path it was oriented to be in the first place and get off this globalist path that we have fallen into.
All right. Well, thank you, listeners. Thank you for listeners to Connecting the Dots, and join us again next week, and we will help you connect a few more dots. Thank you.